You're listening to the Co-Main Event Podcast. And now your hosts, Ben Fowlkes and Chad Dundas.
That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm your co-host from BleacherReport.com, Chad Dundas, and joining me as always from MMA Junkie and USA Today, it's your friend and mine, Mr. Ben Fowlkes. Ben, according to the internet, today, as we record this, April the 30th, the year of our Lord 2018, it's Ragin' Al Iaquinta's birthday.
What?
How about that? I just found that out on the Twitter machine before we started recording this.
How old is he?
I was not prepared for you to ask me that.
Really?
Well,
that seems like the most obvious
Let's
follow-up.
guess, 31?
I was going to say 30. But I assume you're going to look that up right now. You know what? I follow Al Iaquinta on Twitter because I'm not an idiot. So, of course, I want to be down with all the sweet social media content that Ragin' Al's turning out.
You want to stay up to date in the real estate market out there on Long Island?
See, that's
what,
the thing.
4 and 5 bedrooms have just come up for sale?
He's really on that real estate gimmick. I hesitate
I don't
to
think
even
it's a
call it
gimmick.
Well,
That's his job, right? He's a realtor.
it's so really hard to imagine that that's what he's doing every single day. But what, you're pumping your fist?
Well, he just turned 30, so it was a fist pump of regret. If this was the Showcase Showdown over on Price is Right, I would be out because I would have gone over.
Yeah.
Whereas you hit it right on the nose.
I'm glad that you put this in a perspective everyone can understand. But really, he will be out here linking to, hey, the prices have gone up in the Long Island area. Now's the time to sell. Get at me. And it's just man, I don't even own a home in the Long Island area, but I'm halfway there. I'm halfway to convinced to pick up the phone, give Ragin' Al a call, see what he can do for me in the market.
Maybe he's just looking for an in to break into the Missoula real estate market.
Now, see, things are really heating up in the Missoula real estate
it's
market.
crazy out there. As a guy who had too many babies for the current bedroom situation in his home, I can tell you from personal experience, shit is crazy.
Yeah. Too many. You had to upgrade your car, had to go van.
Yeah, well, you had to do that before the baby's even born.
Yeah.
We still got a couple of years before he's going to start demanding his own space, right? He's going to need a studio/office.
Oh no, I've been encouraging my kids to look for apartments just because I wanted to be independent and get out of my house.
Yeah, I'm thinking about maybe an ADU,
Okay.
auxiliary,
Let's call Ragin' Al. He'll explain all the fine
a
points.
dwelling unit. That's basically a guest house in the back, so kids can just live out there.
And when local gangs tag it up, you can do absolutely nothing.
No, I wouldn't do anything. I go for a policy of appeasement.
That's right.
Ben, once again, this episode of the Co-Main Event Podcast is brought to you in part by our friends at Fulton & Rourke. This week, we're proud to help Fulton & Rourke launch their newest limited reserve fragrance, Palmetto. Ben, tell the kids at home a little about that.
Well, Chad, Palmetto has clean and citrusy top notes and features pink pepper spice and magnolia flower complemented with lingering notes of incense and cedar. It's a great spring and summer fragrance, and like all F&R products, it comes with a 30-day, no questions asked return policy, so if you don't like it, you can get your money back, but they think you're going to like it.
I almost guarantee it. I also almost guarantee that we are the only cage fighting podcast out here talking about citrusy top notes, pink pepper spice, and magnolia flower.
Well, I thought they all talk about that.
You think that that's pretty much common ground?
This is the only show I listen to.
You've already heard us praise Fulton & Rourke's line of solid colognes and the handy metal cases that they come in. Go to FultonandRourke.com today and scoop up some Palmetto while supplies last. And as always, when you go over there, you can use the promo code CME at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Ben, the big wrestling show here in Missoula is coming up on Friday.
I can't wait.
Now, the rumor was online that there are fewer than 50 tickets available at this point.
That was as of this morning. We might be down to 40.
I'm pretty sure, this is not just promoter speak. I'm pretty sure this shit is going to sell out. So if anybody out there listening to the sound of our voice who is within driving distance and wants to come out to watch some of the best independent wrestlers in the nation do the damn thing on Friday, May the 4th here in Missoula, Montana, over at the Mask Studios. Come on out, drink the best local beer, eat the best local food, and watch some of the best wrestlers in the world get after each other. Man, time is running out. You got to jump on this thing.
Also, though, if you can't make it, maybe one thing we could do is issue a few live updates for the Patreons over there on our Patreon page.
Hey-oh, now there's an idea.
Maybe take some snapshots from inside the arena, give you a little bit of local color about what's going on the ground, let you know exactly how much of weed Matt Riddle reeks of when he walks in the door. You know, that fun stuff over at patreon.com/co-main event.
And if you go to buy tickets at brownpapertickets.com, you can use the promo code CMEPOD. That's all caps CMEPOD to get $5 off your ticket. It's a bargain. You don't want to miss it. If you come on out, Ben Fowlkes will take a shirtless picture with you, and he will buy you a beer.
Whoa. This has escalated from the last time I heard it.
Well, it's getting closer to the show, trying to turn the heat up.
Okay.
A little bit.
So do we both have to be shirtless for the picture?
It's up to whoever comes.
Well, I'm not comfortable giving away that much license.
Hey, speaking of the Patreon, don't we have something cooking? Don't we have something in the works here?
Okay. Here's my idea. You know, the CME book club was a big hit.
Damn right it was.
And I'm not ruling out another book club episode, especially when I saw Jack Slack on Twitter live tweeting his process of reading Tito Ortiz's memoir. That seems like a maybe for the CME book club. But in the meantime, what we're going to do is something, since we know people love the live streaming events, I've decided, Chad, what we got to do is we got to have Gina Carano movie night.
Now, see, that just sounds delightful.
Now, see, I, though, have not seen any of the Gina Carano vehicles. I saw like Deadpool, she has a little role in, but I have not seen any of the ones where she is actually like the starring, like featured, attraction there. So I narrowed it down to either Haywire,
okay,
2011, or In the Blood from 2014, both of which she stars in. Now, first, we're going to do an online poll. We'll do a Twitter poll.
Okay.
On my Twitter page.
Okay.
After this episode goes up to let people decide which one of these two Gina Carano films they want to watch via a streaming event on our Patreon for patrons only of the CME.
Wait, though, are you going to hit us with some idea? Like, tell us a little bit about the films. Like, I don't want to be flying blind here.
I appreciate that. So I went to IMDb, looked up the plot synopsis here. This is for Haywire. Freelance covert operative Mallory Kane is hired out by her handler to various global entities to perform jobs which governments can't authorize and heads of state would rather not know about.
Is that all one sentence?
Yes, it is.
Wow.
After a mission to rescue a hostage in Barcelona, Mallory is quickly dispatched on another mission to Dublin. When the operation goes awry and Mallory finds she has been double-crossed, she needs to use all of her skills, tricks, and abilities to escape an international manhunt, make it back to the United States, protect her family, and exact revenge on those that have betrayed her.
Hashtag would motherfucking watch.
All right, that's Haywire.
That sounds incredible. Why have I not seen this already?
The plot synopsis for In the Blood, let's just say, is a little more succinct. When her husband goes missing during their Caribbean vacation, a woman sets off on her own to take down the men she thinks are responsible.
Oh, God. Hashtag would motherfucking watch that, too.
I know. That's why we need some help. We need people to weigh in on this.
Okay, so we're going to turn this over to the public.
That's right.
All right, that sounds like a good idea, because I can't choose.
Go to my Twitter, at BenFolksMMA, and we'll have the poll up there. We'll put it up. I'll put it up Tuesday. We'll let it run for a day, see where we land there. And I'm thinking, I don't know what your schedule is like. Maybe next week, maybe next Friday, May 11th. You think, is that a good day to do a streaming event?
Yeah, we'll probably have recovered from the wrestling show by then, don't you think? 7-day recovery period?
That seems like exactly your recovery time from what I know.
We'll be ready to go by then. Yeah, let's do it. Friday, May the 11th.
All right. Have some hard choices here to make. And if you're not down with the CME Patreon, you need to get on that. Patreon.com/co-main event.
We got music again this week from our friend The Fifth Element, a music producer from Fort Worth, Texas. If you like what you hear, you can check him out on Twitter at The Fifth Element, Facebook.com/The Fifth Element, or over there at SoundCloud.com/The Fifth Element Official. And as you know by now, that's the word "the" with an A. 3 rounds as usual this week in the Co-Main Event podcast. In round number 1, Fedor Emelianenko and Frank Mir had themselves a time at Bellator 198 on Saturday. This fight had everything, including back and forth swings of momentum, 2 big bulls throwing them bungalows, rising action, falling action, career resurgences and uneasy questions, a heart-stopping knockout and a heart-rending loss. And oh yeah, did we mention it was only 48 seconds long? And in round number 2, hold up. Did the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix just get fun? And in round number 3, for the first time ever, 2 topics duel for our attention during one round of the CME. as I make the case that we should talk about the possibility of Ben Askren showing up in Bellator and debate his place in welterweight history. And Ben, for whatever reason, tries to make the case for the PFL $1 million tournament as if that's a thing. All that plus are you fucking kidding me and just saying stuff. But first, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
The first piece of listener mail this week comes to us from Terrence Boyd.
Oh yeah, Terrence Boyd. An American professional soccer player, I believe.
Oh really? From the United States?
Well, actually maybe not. Maybe that's just what it says.
I mean, with a name like Terrence Boyd, I would think somewhere in the UK.
Well, the place of birth, Bremen, Germany.
Okay.
But he's the son of an American serviceman and his German wife.
Whew.
Yeah.
We're getting heavy into Terrence Boyd now. Where does he play? He play here in America or overseas?
I don't.
All right, check it out while I read this.
Leipzig, Darmstadt.
That doesn't sound like American.
No.
This one from Terrence Boyd. Hey guys, with ain't much going on, this question is concerning the much ballyhooed debut of BJJ ace Dylan Dennis. He got outboxed on the feet by now 2-4 Kyle Walker, but looked pretty good on the ground, leading to his submission win by toe hold. What did you make of his debut? Does he have the skills to be a star in MMA? Or will more experienced guys be able to knock him out on the feet? Please discourse if you can. Now, Ben, everybody knows Dylan Dennis at this point, despite the fact that he was out there making his MMA debut, professional at least, out there this weekend at Bellator 198. And let me, here's what's interesting about Dylan Dennis, because he's one of the BJJ coaches over there at Straight Blast Gym Dublin, where obviously Conor Anthony McGregor makes his fighting home. Even though this was Dylan Dennis' debut, Ben, people out here already love to hate Dylan Dennis, right? Yeah. And so for him to go out there and get this first round submission victory in Bellator in his pro debut, I'm going to say you could do a lot worse. You could do a lot worse both if you're Dylan Dennis to have this kind of notoriety and get this win in your first fight. And frankly, you could do a lot worse if you're Bellator.
Yeah. You know what Dylan Dennis kind of makes me think of? Remember when Chael Sonnen, when he first started doing his whole bad guy routine, and it was successful and people just ate it up, and a few other fighters would kind of dip their toe in the water. I mean, this is like pre-Colby Covington, like really doing a full-on go at the same impersonation, but this is like, some of the guys would try to amp it up a little bit, and it would just, for one thing, it would make you cringe a little bit, but also make you realize, oh yeah, not everybody can just do that. There are times when I get that feeling from Dylan Dennis, especially like his elaborate outfits and sunglasses, his attempt at like really elevating himself with trash talk, basically talking about how he put this card on his back and he's solely responsible for it being a huge fight card, all that kind of stuff. Like it seems more parody than it did when Conor McGregor was doing it. Like in all regards, it just seems like, your mom went to the store and got you the store brand of Cocoa Puffs and came back. Like that's what it feels like when I see him doing all this stuff.
So you're saying Dylan Dennis is putting on airs. Like he's working a gimmick, whereas maybe with Conor McGregor it feels a little bit more organic.
Or Conor McGregor maybe was just better at the gimmick. Or if you're the second in line for the gimmick, it doesn't work as well.
That's what I think is a big issue here, is that it feels like Dylan Dennis coming out of the same camp as McGregor, despite the fact that Dylan Dennis himself, I believe, is American, right? He's coming out of this Dublin gym, and it feels like he is trying to be, I don't want to say Conor McGregor light, but let's just say Conor McGregor light. It feels like he is trying to be the Conor McGregor of Bellator, which obviously isn't going to work, really. Like, you can't be the other Conor McGregor. You got to be whoever Dylan Dennis is. And maybe this is just unfair to him since we're lumping him in with McGregor because they both come out of this camp. But it does feel like his attitude is a little bit manufactured and almost like he's trying to follow in the footsteps of a teammate who already made it big using this pattern. I guess
it feels like the exact same playbook, I guess is the thing. Also, we were having a discussion, like kind of an internal discussion on MMA Junkie on Sunday where, when we're talking about what deserves more coverage, that kind of thing. And my coworker, Fernando Prata, is making the point, like, wait a minute, are we making Dylan Dennis a thing? Like, we being the media, are we making him more of a thing than he would otherwise be just because, we would like to have somebody interesting to write about, and he's out there jumping up and down saying, pick me, pick me. Like, are we guilty of doing the thing, being like, okay, we're going to buy into it because it's good copy, or are people legitimately interested in it enough, or, like, skill-wise, is he going to be a thing?
Right. Well, and that gets to the heart of this question, I think, from American footballer Terrence Boyd, because the proof will be in the pudding one way or the other for Dillon Danis. Like, I think it's legitimate to give the guy some coverage just because he is this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ace, because he is a teammate of Conor McGregor's, frankly, which will get you in the news, as Artem Lobov well knows. Until you end up in the garage of the Barclays Center making that face where what have I done? You look like Kevin in Home Alone. So I don't know, maybe buyer beware on that sort of notoriety, but like, it doesn't feel, totally manufactured to talk about Dillon Danis. He is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, world champion. He does have, notable skills, as we saw in this fight in his Bellator debut. And frankly, that association with Conor McGregor doesn't hurt until somebody throws a hand truck through a bus. But Dillon Danis is going to have to be good at fighting. Like, it's not like he can go out here and go 1-3 in Bellator and sustain anybody's interest. He needs to fight people. He needs to get wins. And this is a good start here in his Bellator debut, but this may be the defining question of all prospects in MMA, but it's going to be kind of a notion of like who Bellator matches him up against. If you keep getting matched up with guys that seem like easy pickings, like you're automatically going to go out there and crush them like tomato cans, then I don't know that you can get on the mic afterward and be like, all the bums are going to call me out, right?
Right. Well, see, that's the thing. You say he has to win some fights. He can't go 1-3 in Bellator. Or Bellator will not give him the chance to go 1-3
right,
because they will just feed him that. And
it has to be a mixture of both. You got to win fights, and like if you want to be a big swaggering guy on the mic after it's over, you got to beat legitimate people, right? Or am I wrong?
I think for a while at least you can always hide behind the like, hey, he was in his pro debut. What do you want? You want him to go out there and face somebody who's 10-3 in his first pro fight? And I think you can do that for a little while, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bellator does. But yeah, if you want him to get to that next level of being a thing, then pretty soon he's going to have to fight somebody who does not seem like they were just hired to lose.
He is among a but like a notable group of like up and coming prospects that Bellator has. And, a lot of them fought on this card all the way from Dillon Danis to Emmanuel Sanchez, Rafael Lovato, and Naaman Gracie. Like, if you have the time and the inclination to put your eyeballs on Bellator, there are some decent storylines over there and some decent up-and-coming fighters, and Dillon Danis is just like one of the more high-profile up-and-coming young prospects over there in Bellator. So, things may not be as bleak as we think sometimes for Bellator, despite the fact that they are coming off like almost a record-low rating here, not for Fedor versus Mir, but the show before that. One thing else I wanted to say right before we moved on, Ben, wasn't it just last week that you were saying the toe hold is the most embarrassing submission to get caught in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Yep.
And I saw it posited on Twitter to us that perhaps the MMA gods were listening and they heard you say that, and they made them scratch their chins a little bit and be like, let's see what we can do here.
See if we can pull off a toe hold. Yeah, because it does not make your opposition seem more legit to go out there and finish them with a toe hold early in the first round.
Well, that's because we've never seen submissions like this.
Ah,
right?
Okay.
According to
right.
Danis.
Now I get it.
Next question this week comes to us from Eric Murphy. He writes, so Nick Newell gets his UFC shot in the most UFC of UFC moves to fight for free on a reality show. Dana's first comments on Newell in 2013 were, quote, who's he fought? Tell me someone he's beat who matters and we'll talk about getting in the UFC. Jump forward to the year of our Lord 2018 and he is 14-1 at lightweight. So CME pop quiz. How many lightweights with current UFC contracts have fewer than 15 pro fights? Answer, 25. And how many other human male fighters gainfully employed by the UFC have fewer than 15 pro fights? Answer, 160.
Whoa, really?
And most damning, since it's obviously who you beat that matters, the most to get signed by the UFC. How many current fighters don't even have damn Wikipedia pages? Answer, 83. People lie, but numbers don't. Check the record, bud. It spells hypocrisy. Discourse.
Well, first, to correct Eric Murphy on a fact, the people on the Dana White Contender Series do not fight for free. It's not the same as like the Ultimate Fighter kind of thing. But they do usually, at least the last season or whatever it was we're calling it, I believe it was kind of a standard contract of, I don't know if it was 10-10, maybe it was less than 10-10. I'd have to look it up, maybe 8-8 or something. But there was a standard kind of show and win money thing that seemed like everybody was getting pretty much across the board. No word, I don't know yet if Nick Newell is getting that exact same deal or if the deal's changed for everybody or what. But he is getting paid, but it's also not, it's a different promoter of record. officially, so you're not technically working for the UFC yet. You're working for this different promoter, Dana White Contender Series, and they do treat it like a tryout. Like you can, from what we've seen before at least, you can go out there and win your fight in the Dana White Contender Series, and then they do the awkward thing where they have you stand around like the break room in the little warehouse in Las Vegas. You're standing around a little kitchen with next to the basket full of coffee creamers, waiting to have them come in there and say who gets a contract and who doesn't. You could, if you're Nick Newell, at least theoretically go out there, win a fight, and then tell you, hey, thanks for coming, and not take you in the UFC after that.
Well, then that would be kind of a screw job. If Nick Newell wins his fight, I would think he automatically should get into the UFC. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Obviously, Nick Newell's a guy that a lot of MMA fans know, and as Eric Murphy says, he's 14-1 in the lightweight division now. I think he's a guy who's clearly good enough to get a shot at being in the UFC. It wouldn't be a crime or like a surprise to see the guy get signed and come in on a fight night or something like that. Do you feel like it is a huge slight to Nick Newell to put him on the Contender Series? Because I don't really think it's that big of a slight, except that he does have this notoriety. I mean, you just look at the guy's record, and even though he's 14-1, as Eric Murphy points out, he's the only two guys that he's fought have Wikipedia pages. He lost to Justin Gaethje at World Series of Fighting 11, and then Eric Reynolds back in December of 2012 at XFC 21 Night of Champions 2. So like just if you go by the record, it seems like, could you make a case that Nick Newell should go straight to the UFC? Yeah, of course. I think we did it on the show a couple weeks ago, but I actually don't feel like the Contender Series is that big of a screw job so long as he gets in the UFC if he wins his fight.
Well, see, the question I have is what the thinking is behind putting him in the Contender Series and not just taking him to the UFC. Is it that you're actually trying to build him the way, guys like Sugar Sean O'Malley came from the Dana White Contender Series, and then when he goes into the UFC, kind of has a little bit of a head of steam? Is it that you're slowly trying to acclimate people to the idea of a guy with one hand who is still a high-quality fighter who deserves to fight in the UFC? Like, are you trying to get the public used to it? Are you trying to just slowly introduce the idea so that it's not like doesn't seem like a jarring publicity stunt? Because I can understand the UFC being wary of that. Like, you don't want to get the wrong kind of attention and have people think that you're just trying whatever gimmick to get attention. If you can say like, hey, look at this guy's record before, and then we tried him out, and this thing he won there, and then now he's in the UFC, so he has earned his spot there, and it's not like we're just plucking him and throwing him into the UFC to get beat up. I don't know. I wish I knew exactly what the UFC was thinking, why it decided that this was the route to go. Because I do think if you wanted to make the case like that, hey, he deserves to just show up in the UFC like everybody else, you can obviously make that case at this point, especially when you look at who else is already there. Yeah,
and I feel like putting him on the Contender Series is purely cosmetic, just like any quote-unquote controversy about having Nick Newell come and fight in the UFC is obviously purely cosmetic, because as I've said before, you had Trot Teligman come out here and fight in the UFC when he only had one pectoral muscle. You have Michael Bisping fight in the UFC on the regular with an eye that is injured. To what extent, we don't really know. And then you got Big Nog coming out this week and talking, or not this week, but last week, talking about how he had a basically career-long eye injury that hampered his performance during the second half of his career.
Not to mention, have you ever seen Big Nog walk? Have you seen him walk across a room?
Right. So you've got guys out here fighting in the UFC pretty regularly that have, something wrong with their body. And to try to say that Nick Newell needs to jump over a hurdle before he makes it into the UFC is clearly purely cosmetic. And to put Nick Newell on the Contender Series seems cosmetic to me, and frankly like kind of a genius plan on the part of the UFC. Because if he loses, then you can be like, oh, see, we told you guys, Nick Newell not really UFC quality. We'll shuffle him back off to LFA or whatever. And if he wins, then you can be like, well, Nick Newell's kind of our guy. Here he comes in off Dana White Contender Series. It's like you get to pre-stamp the brand on Nick Newell of being like, oh, he's one of Dana White's guys. He's coming off the Contender Series.
Right.
Even though it took a little bit of arm twisting to even get him there.
Yes.
So,
as in years of arm twisting.
Next question this week comes to us from Eden Hazard, professional football player.
That's right.
Over there playing for Chelsea, I believe, at the moment.
Has written into the podcast before.
He writes, after this week's CME newsletter, I thought to myself, oh yeah, Ronda Rousey is really not a good person. By good, I mean having those social values that make you function in society. Kindness, empathy, responsibility, etc. Conor McGregor, also not a good person. Other sports at least try to market the idea that their athletes are upstanding citizens, while the UFC doesn't seem to give two shits. As fans, should we care if someone is a good person like GSP? Should the UFC push philanthropy for their fighters or something? Or is the fight game destined to have white hats versus black hats discourse it?
Well, it seems like maybe Eden Hazard is going a little far by going right to Ronda Rousey as a bad person here. I mean, I think...
Right. Ronda Rousey has not committed any crimes as far as we know.
No, she might have some opinions that we disagree with from time to time. I think, too, Ronda Rousey is also... Like the example he's referencing here about where she made the comment about how it's a privilege to hear me speak. And if you look at like the full comments, she actually before that had like an actual meaningful criticism where talking about the way social media has changed the way people interact with celebrities, especially, and how, you know, anything basically a celebrity does can be turned into a quick headline or a quick tweet, and that's just like food for the content machine. And that is a very valid criticism. That is like the way a lot of the technology and the way people consume media has shaped the way we produce media, like in that image. And so like that's an actual good criticism. The problem that I have with the way Ronda Rousey has approached a lot of this stuff is that even in that article where it was like, she made those comments at a public Q&A at the Wildcard Boxing Gym that was hosted by a Hollywood director. And she's, in several instances recently, you know, she'll go on ESPN and then get mad about an MMA question. Or, you know, she'll say like, hey, she doesn't want to give too much of herself away to people. And then you see her on Hollywood Medium, talking about her dad's death and stuff. And it seems like, okay, you want to pick and choose kind of where you want to leverage your own fame, and exposure. And it has a value to you. It has a value to the WWE. Therefore, it has a value to you. It has a value to media people. But you don't always get to pick and choose exactly how you want. Like, if you want to show up and use ESPN or whatever as your platform to kind of promote your thing, you can't then say you want to control every single question they ask of you, that's my issue with how they want to do that, is they want this exposure when it suits them, but they want it to be exactly the way they want it to be, and that's not how it works.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go as far as to say Ronda Rousey is a bad person, like a little bit rough around the edges, sure. Like, did she say some things at this media event that she probably wishes she could take back at this point? Probably yes.
Or at least rephrase, perhaps.
Yeah, or at least rephrase. And you're right. Like, I think that the criticism she makes of the media is valid, and I think that it's understandable why she would make that criticism. But at the same time, like, she was totally a willing participant of all of that media shaping her public image over the years when she was in the UFC. Like, they couldn't have done it without her willing participation. And in fact, like, you know, in almost all aspects, when she came over to the UFC from Strikeforce, they made a really concerted effort to like turn her into a star in ways as basic as like totally kind of like changing her look. You know what I mean? In ways that we have not really seen them do with a lot of other people, short of Dana White, who has also gotten the same treatment, frankly. But you know, she was willing to do all of that stuff and reap all the rewards of that and do all of the interviews so long as she was winning. And now that she's trying to make this new career for herself, it seems like she wants to, you know, shut down any and all talk of the thing that made her notable in the beginning, and like doesn't want to have anything to do with it, and basically says it's because of those losses. And to me, that's the part of all this that is pretty janky. Like, if you're going to play along when times are good, like, you know, be ready for the times that are not as good, and play along to those as well.
And if you don't, I mean, it's your choice if you want to say like, hey, I don't want to talk about it at all. I don't want to deal with it. I'll get mad at you if you even bring it up. Hey, fine. That's a choice you do get to make. But don't be surprised when people are critical of you for that, because one of the things that people like about this sport especially is the way that it puts people under such an intense microscope and an intense spotlight that we learn a lot about you. And we learn a lot about you both in victory and defeat, maybe more in defeat. And I mean, for me, a lot of those moments really stand out for me, where you see how a fighter handles like a loss or a huge disappointment, like Dominic Cruz showing up to the press conference after losing to Cody Garbrandt and being able to do that really clear professional dissection of his own loss. Miesha Tate showing up with, the ice pack on her nose after losing her title to Amanda Nunes, like stuff like that, I'll never forget. And if you do the opposite, where, you completely run away from it and you don't want to deal with it, and you act like it's completely unfair that anybody would keep asking you about it, then that reflects on you as well. So, I mean, handle it however you want to, but just because you don't want to talk about it doesn't mean that other people won't talk about the way that you're handling it. You're still telling us something about yourself.
All right, let's do one more. Ben, do you want to do Craig Beckwith's question about the Ultimate Fighter, or do you want to do Josh Montgomery's question about whether the UFC should do tournaments?
Let's do the tournament one.
All right, this one's from Josh Montgomery. So the internet fandom is abuzz over the Fedor versus Mir fight that went down 40 miles from my house and on a channel that I do not have. I made zero effort to make the trip to see it live, nor did I feel like paying the $5 a month for the Paramount Network. What all the buzz did for me, though, is really make me wonder why the UFC does not make any more of an effort to dip their toes into the tourney format. Lightweight right now is perfect for that. A few short years ago, the UFC did an all-heavyweight pay-per-view card, and it seemed to go off well. I think that an August-September pay-per-view card in Vegas with Nurmi defending his title and Alvarez, Poirier, and Lee plugged in either versus him or in a, I don't know what that, maybe third? It says 5 RD.
5 round.
5 round. There we go. Co-main event with a guaranteed title shot for the winner. I think that shit is fire. They come around to the rest of the main card with lightweights as tourney alternate fights to help with injury alleviation, and which also can lead to future number one contender fight. It sorts out a lot of shit directly and would be a lot of fun. If it is promoted right, I think it would do well at the box office as well. Thoughts?
I'm sure we're going to talk more about exactly how the Bellator tournament is working, but I think that one of the things we've heard the UFC, it feels like the UFC has just kind of taken a stance on this where they decided, you know what? Nope, we don't want to do tournaments. It's risky. Too much stuff can go wrong, and so we're not even willing to consider the idea. We've seen little mini tournaments kind of stuff before, like for the when we first instituted the men's flyweight title. Or sometimes it seems like it has created de facto tournaments where we're trying to establish a number one contender. We have a few options, and so we'll have them fight it out without actually calling it a tournament. I kind of understand why the UFC is worried about tournaments, just because who has been bitten by the injury bug more and worse than the UFC at this point? Some huge fights and huge events have been reshuffled because of injuries. I can understand why they would look at the potential for doing like an 8 or 16 man field and think, nope, I don't even want to touch it. Plus, the UFC loves to kind of plug holes and fix problems by pulling people out of some fights and reshuffling things around, and a tournament makes that really difficult to do because you have all the people that you care about already right there on paper. But I do think, people love a tournament.
Yes.
You could just see it over and over again. Like, even when the tournament doesn't matter, even when the people who might otherwise not matter, even when individual matchups might not matter outside the tournament, you put it in a tournament context where it's clear what happens and what the progression is. People love that shit, and they understand it immediately.
Yeah, and I agree with you that it seems obvious why you wouldn't want to do a tournament in mixed martial arts, especially just because they have a tendency to turn into such boondoggles a lot of the time. But a lightweight tournament in the UFC right now would be so awesome. It would be so cool. And it would alleviate a lot of the other so-called problems or the the kind of logjam that we have up around the title picture there. And especially with the UFC right now needing as many sparks as it can get, frankly, in its live programming to sort of make people tune in or to grab people's attention and hold their attention. I feel like it would be super awesome to do a lightweight Grand Prix, and you can run down the list pretty much all the way down the UFC rankings because you got your guy OAM down there at number 15.
That's my guy now.
Everybody would want to see him. Paul Felder, Anthony Pettis, James Vick, the birthday boy, Ray Janal, Michael Chiesa, Nate Diaz, although you couldn't get him, Justin Gaethje, Edson Barboza, Kevin Lee. If you did a 15 or a 16-man lightweight tournament, that shit, as Josh Montgomery writes, would indeed be fire.
Plus, it would also be a good counter to one of the frequent criticisms we see of the UFC these days, which is if you take a guy like Paul Felder or OAM or somebody, and you say, hey, what does this guy have to do to become a star, to become a champion, to make that champion money? And the UFC can't clearly tell you what he has to do, because winning all the fights isn't always enough. And you put everybody in a tournament, and it creates this fairness where if you just win, next thing you know, you could be standing there in the finals, one win away from being the UFC champion. And people, they love that idea. They love the possibility for that Cinderella story kind of thing. I mean, that's one of the things, why college football took so much shit for so many years, where it would be like, okay, we'll go to the bowl system, which means that some teams, no matter how well their season goes, they know at the start of the year they do not have the potential to be a national champion. And that sucks some of the excitement away from it. But if you put them all together in that field and you just say, all right, whoever is the best is going to be left standing at the end of this, everybody can get into that.
Yeah, and like in college football, if you just eyeball these UFC rankings right now, I'm just going to say a couple of what would be approximate first-round matchups if these were the actual seeds.
Oh, God, this is going to be fun.
Round 1, Paul Felder versus Tony Ferguson.
Would watch.
Alexander Hernandez versus Eddie Alvarez.
Would watch.
Anthony Pettis versus Dustin Poirier.
Would watch.
James Vick versus Kevin Lee.
Would watch.
Raging Al against Edson Barbosa.
Of course.
Michael Chiesa versus Justin Gaethje.
I mean, come on.
That sounds like it would suck, doesn't it?
I'm all in.
That's going to do it for this week's listener mail. If you have questions or comments or concerns that you would like to air to the podcast in future weeks, you know how to do it. You go to the website, comainevent.com, and click the link in the top right-hand corner of the screen that says email the podcast. That'll get you in touch with us. While you're there, you can sign up for the Breakfast of Champions newsletter. That comes out every Friday morning to catch you up on the news and notes that we miss on all these days that we're not recording the podcast. Stuff clearly always happens. News clearly always breaks. The newsletter itself is short. It's informative. We would love to tell you it's funny. And the best part is, it's really easy to unsubscribe. Though, it's not so easy to resubscribe. I'm starting to get emails from people that say that once they unsubscribe, for whatever reason, our email client will not let them resubscribe.
You know what the lesson there is?
Don't unsubscribe.
Don't fuck around with this.
That's right. As for right now, though, we are going to go ahead and get started with round number 1.